The observation deck of the Harmony's edge hummed quietly as Quan Ho pressed his 4 hands against the viewing window. Stars stretched endlessly before him, tiny points of light in the vast darkness of space. He had dreamed of this moment for years. His first assignment with the Galactic Peacekeeping Division, at 23 years old. He was the youngest Villani ever chosen for such an important mission. His pale blue skin reflected the starlight as he adjusted his position. His large, sensitive eyes were perfectly designed for the low-light environments his people preferred. Everything about the Villani spoke of peace and harmony. They had not fought a war in over 2,000 years. Violence was something they read about in history books, not something they experienced. The emergency alarm broke his peaceful moment. Red lights flashed throughout the ship as Commander Veltar's voice echoed through the speakers. All personnel were to report to the main briefing room immediately. Quan Ho hurried through the curved corridors of the ship, his soft footsteps barely making a sound. The briefing room was packed with representatives from 12 different species. Quan Ho found a seat near the back, pulling out his datapad to record everything. As a xenobiologist, his job was to observe and document. He took this responsibility seriously. Commander Veltar, a tall being with silver skin and 3 eyes, stood at the front of the room. Behind him, a holographic display showed a map of the Outer Rim territories. Several star systems were marked in red. 3 days ago, we lost contact with the Meridian colony, the commander began. His voice was calm, but Quan Ho could hear the concern underneath. Yesterday, we lost contact with 2 more systems. Our long-range scouts have confirmed our worst fears. The holographic display changed, showing images that made several delegates gasp. Entire planets had been stripped bare. Where once there had been forests and oceans, now there was only empty rock. Cities that had housed millions were gone without a trace. The Devourers have returned, Commander Veltar said quietly. Quan Ho had heard stories about the Devourers, but he had always thought they were myths. According to legend, they were a species that consumed everything in their path. They turned living worlds into empty shells. Most importantly, they could not be reasoned with or stopped. Our scientists estimate that at their current rate of expansion, they will consume 47 star systems within the next 6 months, the commander continued. One of those systems contains a recently discovered species, a species that has never encountered galactic civilization. The display showed a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star. It looked peaceful and beautiful from space. White clouds swirled over green continents and blue oceans. The species calls their world Earth. They call themselves humans, Commander Veltar explained. According to our first contact protocols, we must warn them of the approaching threat. We must also offer them evacuation assistance. Quan Ho made notes on his datapad as the commander continued the briefing. The human system was directly in the path of the Devourer fleet. The aliens would arrive there in approximately 120 hours. It was barely enough time to make contact and organize an evacuation. The diplomatic team will consist of Ambassador Zormel, Chief Medical Officer Hinjo, and Junior Xenobiologist Quan Ho, the commander announced. Quan Ho nearly dropped his datapad. He was going to make first contact with an entirely new species. His hearts began beating faster with excitement and nervousness. The journey to Earth took 18 hours. During that time, Quan Ho studied everything the long-range scouts had, learned about humans. They were a young species having achieved faster than light travel only 50 years ago. They had established colonies on 12 worlds, all within their home system. What troubled Quan Ho were the historical records. Humans seemed to spend a remarkable amount of time fighting each other. Their planet was scarred with the remains of countless wars. They had even developed weapons capable of destroying their entire world. They appear to be a naturally aggressive species, he noted in his report. This may make evacuation efforts difficult. The Harmony's edge dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the human system. Immediately, they were surrounded by human ships, sleek vessels with powerful engines, and what appeared to be weapon systems aimed directly at them. Unknown. Vessel, identify yourself immediately. came a voice over the communication system. The words were translated automatically, but Quan Ho could hear the authority and suspicion in the speaker's tone. Ambassador Zormel stepped forward to handle the negotiations. Within an hour, they had been granted permission to approach Earth. A small delegation of humans would meet them aboard their flagship, a massive vessel they called the Soul's Pride. Quan Ho had never seen anything like the human ship, where Galactic Council vessels were curved and flowing, designed for comfort and efficiency. The human ship looked like it had been built for war. Every line spoke of power and strength. Weapons batteries dotted its hull, like the spines of some ancient creature. The meeting took place in a conference room deep within the human ship. Quan Ho sat quietly in the corner, recording everything as the human leaders entered. Admiral Jiwoo was clearly in command. She was a woman of middle age, with short black hair and intelligent dark eyes. She moved with the confidence of someone used to making life-and-death decisions. Beside her walked Commander Dong Min, a younger man with a serious expression and quick, observant eyes. "Welcome to human space," Admiral Jiwoo said as she took her seat. "We appreciate you coming so far to meet with us." Ambassador Zormel began, with the standard first contact protocols, explaining about the Galactic Council and galactic civilization. The humans listened politely, asking occasional questions that showed they understood the implications of everything they were hearing. Then the ambassador delivered the warning about the Devourers. Quan Ho watched the humans' faces carefully as they learned about the approaching threat. He expected to see fear, panic, or desperation. Instead, Admiral Jiwoo simply nodded and asked practical questions. How large is their fleet? She wanted to know. What kind of weapons do they use? Commander Dongmin asked. Have they ever been defeated? Admiral Jiwoo inquired. The questions continued for over an hour. The humans wanted to know everything about Devourer tactics, technology, and behavior patterns. They took detailed notes and asked for copies of all available data. Finally, Ambassador Zormel made the evacuation offer. The Galactic Council was prepared to help relocate the human population to safe worlds far from the Devourer path. Admiral Jiwoo and Commander Dongmin exchanged looks. Then the Admiral smiled politely. We appreciate the offer, she said, but we'll have to decline. The ambassador looked shocked. You don't understand, he said urgently. The Devourers cannot be fought. They consume everything. Your only choice is evacuation. With respect, Ambassador, Admiral Jiwoo replied. Running away is never our only choice. We'd like to request 72 hours to prepare our response to this threat. Commander Dongmin leaned forward. In the meantime, we'd appreciate all the tactical data you can provide about these Devourers. Weaknesses, behavioral patterns, anything that might be useful. Quan Ho stared at the humans in amazement. They had just been told about an unstoppable force heading directly toward their home, and their response was to ask for tactical information. Either they didn't understand the danger, or they were planning something that defied all logic. As the meeting ended, and the galactic delegation prepared to return to their ship, Quan Ho found himself deeply troubled. In his preliminary report, he wrote, Humans appear to lack proper survival instincts. They show more interest in studying their predators than fleeing from them. Recommend psychological evaluation to determine if species suffers from collective mental deficiency. But even as he wrote those words, something nagged at him. The humans hadn't seemed stupid or crazy. They had asked intelligent questions and understood the situation perfectly. So why weren't they afraid? The answer to that question would change everything Quan Ho thought he knew about war, survival, and what it meant to be truly dangerous. 48 hours had passed since the meeting with human leaders. Quan Ho remained aboard the Harmony's edge, floating at the edge of the human star system. His mission was simple: observe and document human behavior before their inevitable destruction. Ambassador Zormel expected to witness panic, mass evacuations, and desperate pleas for help. Instead, Quan Ho watched something he had never seen before in his life. From his position at the observation station, he could monitor communications across the entire human system. His translation software worked around the clock, converting thousands of conversations into data he could understand. What he heard made no sense. There was no panic. There were no screams of terror. There was no chaos. Instead, the humans had begun what they called total war mobilization. Quan Ho watched through his long-range sensors as every human world transformed before his eyes. On Earth, factories that had been making clothes and furniture suddenly started producing weapons and armor. Scientists abandoned research projects they had worked on for decades to focus on military technology. Even human children were involved, growing food in gardens and collecting materials for the war effort. "This is impossible," Quan Ho muttered to himself as he recorded the data. "They cannot mobilize an entire civilization in less than 2 days." But the evidence was right in front of him. Across 12 human worlds, the same transformation was happening. Civilian ships were being converted into military vessels. Peaceful research stations were becoming weapons platforms. Mining operations had switched to producing materials for armor and ammunition. The most disturbing part was how organized it all appeared. There was no confusion or delay. Every human seemed to know exactly what to do. It was as if they had been planning for this moment their entire lives. His communication panel chimed. A message was incoming from the human flagship. Admiral Jiwoo was requesting permission to send a liaison officer to the Galactic Council ship. Within an hour, a small human shuttle docked with the Harmony's Edge. The passenger was Dr. So Young, a human xenobiologist who had been assigned to work with Quan Ho. She was a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a calm manner that seemed out of place given the circumstances. "Hello, Quan Ho," she said in perfect galactic standard language. "I hope we can work together during this difficult time." Quan Ho studied her carefully. She showed no signs of stress or fear. Her hands were steady, her voice was calm, and she even smiled when she spoke. Either humans were very good at hiding their emotions, or they truly were not afraid of the approaching threat. "Dr. So Young," he began carefully, "I must ask you something that may seem rude. Do your people understand the danger they are in? The Devourers have never been defeated. They consume everything in their path." So, Young nodded seriously. "We understand perfectly. We've been studying the data you provided. The Devourers are indeed a formidable enemy. Then why are your people not evacuating? Why are they preparing to fight an unwinnable war?" So Young was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. Then she walked over to the viewing window and pointed toward the human worlds below. "Let me tell you about human history, Quan Ho," she said softly. "For most of our existence as a species, we have been at war, not with aliens or monsters, but with ourselves. We fought over land, resources, ideas, and beliefs. We created weapons that could destroy our entire planet. We built armies that numbered in the millions." Quan Ho made notes as she spoke. This confirmed what he had read in the historical records. Many species would see this as a weakness, So Young continued. They would think we are naturally violent and destructive. But there is another way to look at it. She turned to face him directly. Every human alive today is descended from survivors. Our ancestors lived through wars, plagues, natural disasters, and countless other threats. Those who could not adapt died out. Those who could fight, think, and survive passed on their genes to the next generation. "You're saying that humans are naturally selected for warfare?" Quan Ho asked. "Not just warfare, survival under extreme conditions. When faced with extinction, we don't just fight. We adapt. We evolve. We become whatever we need to become to ensure our species continues." So Young led him to a computer terminal and pulled up files on human military history. Images flashed across the screen showing battles, weapons, and strategies from thousands of years of human conflict. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a battle from their ancient history. Humans surrounded by enemies with superior numbers and better weapons. They adapted by changing their tactics, using the terrain, and turning their enemies' strengths against them. More images followed. Humans fighting in frozen wastelands, burning deserts and deep oceans. They had developed different weapons and strategies for every possible environment and enemy. "We have been preparing for something like the Devourers our entire existence," So Young explained. "We just didn't know what it would look like when it finally arrived." Quan Ho felt a chill run through his forearms. You mean humans have been preparing for an extinction-level threat? Every human knows the basic principles of warfare. Every human understands that sometimes you have to fight for survival. It's not that we want war, Kwanho. It's that we refuse to simply lie down and die when war comes to us. Over the next several hours, So Young showed him more examples of human adaptation and survival. She explained how their entire educational system included lessons about overcoming impossible odds. Human children learned about battles where outnumbered forces defeated vastly superior enemies through intelligence, determination, and sacrifice. Your people are remarkable in their own way, So Young said. The Villani have achieved something beautiful, a civilization based on peace and harmony. But peace can only exist when there is no external threat. When the threat arrives, someone has to be willing to fight. As if to prove her point, Kwanho's sensors detected new activity in the human system. Admiral Jiwoo's fleet was moving into defensive positions around key worlds. But their formations were unlike anything in standard military doctrine. Instead of protecting their worlds directly, the human ships were positioning themselves in seemingly random locations throughout the system. Some were hiding behind asteroids. Others were disguised as civilian vessels. A few had actually moved closer to the expected Devourer entry point. What are they doing? Kwanho asked. Their defensive positions make no sense. So Young smiled grimly. They're not taking defensive positions. They're setting traps. Through his communication systems, Kwanho could hear Admiral Jiwoo coordinating with commanders across human space. Her voice was calm and professional as she discussed strategies that made Kwanho's peaceful mind recoil in horror. Commander Dongmin, confirm that the civilian evacuation of Sector 7 is complete. We need that area clear for Operation Honeytrap. Understood, Admiral. All civilians have been relocated to hardened shelters. The bait ships are in position. What are bait ships? Kwanho asked quietly. Ships designed to look helpless and valuable, So Young explained. When the Devourers attack them, they'll discover that the ships are actually filled with weapons designed specifically to hurt creatures like them. Kwanho stared at her in shock. You're using your own people as bait? Volunteers only, So Young said firmly. Every person on those ships chose to be there. They understand the risks and the importance of the mission. As the hours passed, Kwanho watched the human system transform into something he barely recognized. What had once been a collection of peaceful worlds was now a carefully constructed killing ground. Every asteroid had been equipped with sensors or weapons. Every trade route had been booby-trapped. Every civilian facility had been turned into a potential fortress. Most disturbing of all was how normal the humans acted during this transformation. Children still went to school, though now they learned about devourer biology alongside mathematics. Families still ate dinner together, though the conversations often involved discussions of evacuation procedures and emergency protocols. How can your people remain so calm? Kwanho asked So Young as they watched a group of human children playing in a park while their parents installed weapon systems in nearby buildings. Because we trust each other, she replied simply. Every human knows that every other human will do whatever it takes to protect our species. We don't need to panic because we know we're prepared. The communication panel chimed again. This time it was a priority message from the long-range sensor array. Commander Veltar's voice filled the observation deck. All stations, be advised. Long-range sensors have detected the Devourer fleet entering human space. Estimated time to first contact, 18 hours. Kwanho expected this news to finally break the humans' strange calm. Instead, So Young simply nodded and activated her personal communicator. Admiral Jiwoo, this is Dr. So Young aboard the Galactic Council ship. The observers have confirmed Devourer fleet arrival, initiating final phase preparations. Understood, Doctor. Thank you for the confirmation. All units, you heard the lady. Game time is in 18 hours. Make them count. As So Young prepared to return to the human fleet, Kwanho grabbed her arm with one of his 4 hands. So Young, please. Your people don't have to die. There are evacuation ships ready. You could save your entire population. She looked at him with something. The Devourer fleet arrived like a plague of metal and flesh across the stars. Quan Ho watched from the observation deck of the Harmony's Edge as hundreds of bioships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of human space. Each vessel was the size of a small moon, their hulls pulsing with organic life that had been twisted into weapons of war. The sight made Quan Ho's 4 hearts skip beats. He had seen recordings of devourer ships before, but witnessing them in person was something entirely different. They looked alive and hungry, like massive predators that had evolved in the depths of space. Their surfaces writhed with tentacles and feeding organs that could drain the life from entire worlds. "Sweet ancestors," whispered Ambassador Zormel from beside him. "There are so many of them." Quan Ho began counting the ships, but stopped when he reached 200. The Devourer fleet stretched across space like a dark cloud, blotting out the stars behind them. Every previous conquest had involved perhaps 20 or 30 ships. This was their entire military force, gathered to crush humanity once and for all. The first human defensive line waited in the outer system. 50 human ships faced down an enemy fleet 4 times their size. Any sane species would have immediately retreated or surrendered. The humans opened fire, but they did not fight the way the Galactic Council fought wars. There was no formal declaration, no attempt at negotiation, no honorable single combat between champions. The humans simply began killing their enemies with ruthless efficiency. Admiral Jiwoo's voice came over the communication channels as she coordinated the attack. "All units initiate protocol Wasp Nest. Make them bleed for every meter." What happened next made Quan Ho question everything he thought he knew about warfare and civilization. The human ships did not try to win a glorious victory. Instead, they fought like cornered animals, using every dirty trick and underhanded tactic they could devise. When Devourer bioships attempted to consume a human cruiser, they discovered that the ship's hull had been coated with a substance that was poisonous to their kind. Commander Byung-ho led a squadron of volunteer ships directly into the heart of the Devourer fleet. As soon as the bioships began trying to absorb his vessels, he detonated nuclear weapons inside their feeding chambers. The explosion tore through 3 Devourer ships from the inside out. Martyrdom 1 to Fleet Command came Byung-ho's final transmission. Weak point confirmed in feeding organs. Recommend immediate exploitation. Quan Ho watched in horror as human after human sacrificed themselves to gather intelligence about their enemies. They called it data gathering through martyrdom operations. Each death provided valuable information that was immediately transmitted to other human forces. But the Devourers adapted quickly. They began attacking the human ships from greater distances, using energy weapons instead of trying to feed on them directly. For a moment, it seemed like they had learned to counter human tactics. That was when the humans revealed the true depth of their preparation. Captain Hai-jin commanded a heavy cruiser that appeared to be badly damaged and drifting helplessly. When a group of Devourer ships moved in to finish her off, they discovered that her ship had been disguised to look disabled. Hidden weapon systems emerged from what appeared to be hull breaches, tearing into the bioships at point-blank range. "Trojan, Horse 7 to all units," Hai-jin reported calmly as her weapons ripped through enemy hulls. "Deception protocol is working. Enemy is taking the bait." Across the battlefield, similar traps were being sprung. Ships that looked like civilian transports revealed themselves to be heavily armed warships. Escape pods that seemed to contain fleeing refugees actually held guided missiles that detonated when the Devourers tried to consume them. The humans had turned their own apparent weaknesses into weapons. Their need to evacuate civilians became a way to deliver explosives. Their damaged ships became perfect ambush platforms. Even their dead became tools of war, as disabled human vessels were rigged to explode when the Devourers tried to feed on them. But perhaps most disturbing was how the humans used their enemies' own biology against them. Quan Ho watched as human scientists working in real time during the battle analyzed Devourer tissue samples and developed new weapons. Dr. Min Seo, working from a research station near the battle zone, had created a virus that attacked the Devourer's regeneration systems. Instead of healing damage, infected bioships began growing cancerous tumors that consumed them from within. "Virus deployment successful," she reported to Admiral Jiwoo. "Enemy regeneration is now working against them. Estimated 30%. Reduction in combat effectiveness within the hour. The humans had somehow turned the Devourer's greatest strength into a fatal weakness. Creatures that had evolved to heal from any wound were now being killed by their own bodies. As the battle continued, Quan Ho began to understand something terrible. The humans were not just fighting to survive. They were fighting to learn. Every exchange with the enemy taught them something new. Every death provided data that made them more dangerous. Lieutenant Commander Jae-min led a reconnaissance group that allowed itself to be partially consumed by a Devourer mothership. As his men died horribly in the creature's feeding chambers, they transmitted detailed information about its internal structure. Central nervous system located, came his final report. Coordinates transmitted. Strike teams, you have your target. Within minutes, human strike craft were diving into the wounds his team had died to create. They delivered precision strikes, directly to the mothership's brain, killing a creature the size of a city with surgical accuracy. The battle raged for 12 hours. When it finally ended, the Devourer fleet had lost 60 ships. Never in their history had they suffered such casualties in a single engagement. More importantly, they had failed to consume a single human world. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers retreated. Admiral Jiwoo's voice came over the communication channels as the enemy fleet withdrew. All units, maintain pursuit for 30 minutes, then return to defensive positions. Well done, everyone. We hurt them badly today. Commander Dongmin began reading casualty reports. 23 human ships had been destroyed. Over 8,000 human lives had been lost. In any previous galactic conflict, such losses would have been considered catastrophic. The humans treated them as acceptable casualties in exchange for the knowledge they had gained. Quan Ho listened as human commanders discussed what they had learned from the battle. They now knew the exact composition of Devourer bioships. They understood how their regeneration systems worked. They had identified 17 different weak points that could be exploited in future engagements. Most importantly, they had proven that the Devourers could be hurt. Analysis complete, reported Dr. So Young from her research station. Enemy regeneration rate has been reduced by 40% fleet-wide. Viral weapons are spreading through their collective nervous system. They will be significantly weakened for the next engagement. Ambassador Zormel turned to Quan Ho with horror in his three eyes. Did you understand what just happened? The humans didn't just fight the Devourers. They performed scientific experiments on them during combat. Quan Ho was busy recording everything in his datapad. His hands shook as he tried to process what he had witnessed. The humans had not won through superior technology or overwhelming force. They had won by being willing to sacrifice anything and everything to gain an advantage over their enemies. They had turned war into science, and science into war. Every death served a purpose. Every loss provided valuable information. They were not just fighting the Devourers, they were dissecting them, learning their secrets, and preparing to use that knowledge to destroy them completely. As the human fleet regrouped and began preparations for the next battle, Quan Ho realized something that chilled him to his core. The Devourers had faced many different species over thousands of years. They had consumed countless civilizations, but they had never encountered anything like humanity. They had never fought an enemy that could learn and adapt faster than they could evolve. They had never faced opponents who were willing to sacrifice their own lives just to gather data. The Devourers thought they were fighting a war. The humans were conducting the largest biological research project in galactic history, and they were using their enemies as unwilling test subjects. For the first time since the battle began, Quan Ho wondered if he was witnessing the birth of something far more dangerous than the Devourers had ever been. 3 months had passed since the first battle between humans and Devourers. The war had spread across multiple star systems, leaving death and destruction in its wake. Quan Ho had been reassigned from simple observation to active study of human combat psychology. What he discovered in those 3 months would haunt him for the rest of his life. The Galactic Council maintained their official position of neutrality, but every species in the galaxy watched the conflict with growing fascination and fear. The humans were not just surviving against the Devourers, they were winning. But the cost of their victories was becoming clear, and it terrified everyone who witnessed it. Quan Ho's new assignment took him to human military bases, hospitals, and command centers. He was supposed to study how humans maintained their fighting spirit under such terrible conditions. Instead, he discovered that the war was changing humanity into something that no longer resembled the species he had first met. His first interview was with Colonel Tae-hyun, a veteran of what humans called the Siege of New Busan. The colony world had been under devourer attack for 6 weeks before human reinforcements could arrive. When they finally broke through, they found a planet that had been transformed into a fortress of unimaginable horror. Colonel Tae-hyun sat across from Quan Ho in a sterile medical facility. His left arm was missing, replaced by a mechanical prosthetic that moved with inhuman precision. His eyes were the worst part. They looked like they belonged to someone much older, someone who had seen too much death. The devourers had surrounded our main population center, the colonel explained in a voice completely empty of emotion. 2 million civilians trapped in the city. My orders were to hold the line at any cost. Quan Ho made notes as the colonel continued his report. The details were horrifying. The devourers had used human civilians as living shields, forcing the defenders to watch as their own people were slowly consumed. They had broadcast the sounds of the feeding to demoralize the human soldiers. On day 38 of the siege, the devourers broke through our outer defenses, Colonel Tae-hyun said. They were moving toward the civilian shelters. I had a choice to make. The colonel paused, staring at something only he could see. I ordered a nuclear strike on my own position. Quan Ho stopped writing. You ordered an attack on your own forces? The blast killed 40,000 of my own people, the colonel continued without expression. But it also killed 300,000 devourers and stopped their advance. The remaining civilians survived until reinforcements arrived. How do you feel about that decision? Quan Ho asked carefully. Colonel Tae-hyun looked at him with those terrible empty eyes. I feel regret that I didn't make the decision faster. Those 40,000 people died because I hesitated for 6 hours while I looked for alternatives. The interview ended shortly after that. As Quan Ho walked through the medical facility, he saw hundreds of other human soldiers receiving treatment. Many had injuries that would have been fatal to other species. The humans simply replaced missing parts with mechanical substitutes and returned to combat. But the physical wounds were not the worst part. It was the look in their eyes, the same empty expression he had seen in Colonel Tae-hyun. They looked like people who had given up their humanity in order to save it. His next interview was with Dr. Yoon-ji, a human biochemist working on what they called devourer-specific weapons. She worked in a laboratory that looked more like a torture chamber than a place of science. Captured devourer specimens were held in containment cells, being subjected to various experiments. We have developed 17 different biological agents that cause extreme pain to devourers, Dr. Yoon-ji explained, as she showed Quan Ho around the facility. Pain is important because it affects their collective consciousness. When one devourer suffers, all nearby devourers experience some of that suffering. She led him to a containment cell where a captured devourer writhed in apparent agony. The creature was barely alive, its biomechanical systems failing as they fought against some invisible poison. This specimen has been exposed to Agent 17, Dr. Yoon-ji said, making notes on her data pad. It has been in this state for 72 hours. The pain will continue for approximately another week before the creature dies. Quan Ho stared at the suffering creature in horror. Why not simply kill it quickly? Dr. Yoon-ji looked at him like he had asked why she did not cut off her own arm. Because quick death serves no strategic purpose. When we deploy Agent 17 in combat, the devourers in the area become distracted by the suffering of their infected comrades. This gives our forces a tactical advantage. She showed him weapon after weapon designed not just to kill, but to cause maximum suffering. Viruses that made devourers eat themselves alive. Chemicals that turned their regeneration systems into instruments of torture. Biological agents that attacked their nervous systems and left them paralyzed but fully aware as they died slowly. Is this not Kwan Ho struggled to find the right words. Is this not cruel? Dr. Yunji stopped walking and turned to face him. For a moment, something human flickered in her eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the same cold emptiness he had seen in Colonel Tae-hyun. Cruelty is a luxury we cannot afford, she said simply. Every weapon that causes devourer suffering saves human lives. My job is not to be kind to our enemies. My job is to make them so afraid of fighting us that they surrender or retreat. The most disturbing interview came when Kwan Ho met with Major Subin and her unit of war orphans. These were human children whose families had been killed in devourer attacks. Instead of being sent to safe worlds, they had been trained as soldiers and now served on the front lines of the conflict. Major Subin was 15 years old. She stood barely as tall as Kwan Ho's shoulder, but she wore the uniform of a human, military officer, and carried weapons designed for beings twice her size. Her service record showed more confirmed kills than most Galactic Council soldiers achieved in their entire careers. My parents died during the attack on Terra Nova, she explained as she cleaned a rifle with practiced efficiency. I was 12 when it happened. I watched the devourers feed on them for 3 hours before human forces could reach our position. Her voice was completely calm as she described watching her family die. She might have been discussing the weather or what she had eaten for breakfast. After the rescue, I was offered placement in a safe colony far from the war zone, she continued. I chose military service instead. My parents died because we were not strong enough to protect them. I will not let that happen to anyone else. Introduced Kwan Ho to her unit, 20 other children between the ages of 13 and 16. They had all lost families to devourer attacks. They all spoke of their dead relatives in the same emotionless tone. They all cleaned and maintained their weapons with the skill of professional soldiers. Do you ever think about what you will do when the war ends? Kwan Ho asked Major Subin. She looked at him with confusion, as if the question made no sense. The war will not end until every devourer is dead or completely defeated. That is the only acceptable outcome. But what about your life after the war? Your future? Major Subin thought about this for a long moment. Then she resumed cleaning her weapon. My future is ensuring that other children do not have to become soldiers like me. If I must remain a soldier forever to accomplish this, then that is what I will do. As his interviews continued, Kwan Ho began to understand the true cost of humanity's war against the devourers. They were not just fighting to survive. They were sacrificing their own nature to become something capable of winning. Colonel Tae-hyun had given up his ability to feel guilt about necessary deaths. Dr. Yunji had abandoned her compassion for the enemy in order to create more effective weapons. Major Subin had surrendered her childhood to become a perfect instrument of war. Each human he interviewed had given up some essential part of their humanity. They did this not because they wanted to, but because they understood that victory required sacrifice. They were willing to sacrifice not just their lives but their very souls to protect their species. The most horrifying part was that their strategy was working. The devourers were losing ground for the first time in their recorded history. Human weapons were becoming more effective every day. Human tactics were evolving faster than the devourers could adapt. But as Kwan Ho completed his research and prepared his report, he found himself asking a question that kept him awake at night. If humans were willing to give up their humanity, to defeat their enemies, what would they become when the war was over? And perhaps more importantly, what would happen to the rest of the galaxy when these transformed humans turned their attention to other threats? 1 year after first contact, humanity launched Operation Final Harvest. It was their plan to completely eliminate the devourer threat once and for all. Kwan Ho had requested permission to join the observation team that would follow the human fleet into devourer home territory. What he witnessed there would reshape his understanding of war, victory, and the price both demanded. The human fleet that assembled for the final offensive was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Over 300 ships waited at the edge of known space, but they were no longer the vessels Kwan Ho had first observed a year ago. These ships had been rebuilt, redesigned, and weaponized based on everything humanity had learned from fighting. The Devourer's Admiral Sung Ho commanded the operation from his flagship, a massive vessel called Righteous Fury. The ship looked more like a living creature than a machine, its hull covered in biomechanical systems that had been reverse-engineered from captured Devourer technology. It was both beautiful and terrifying, a perfect fusion of human engineering and alien evolution. "All fleet commanders, this is Admiral Sung Ho," came the announcement over the communication channels. "We are entering Devourer space in 30 minutes. Remember our mission. Complete elimination of the threat. No Devourer ship, station, or world can remain capable of future aggression against any galactic civilization." Quan Ho watched from the observation deck of the Council ship as the human fleet jumped to faster-than-light travel. They emerged in a star system that had been the Devourer's home for over 10,000 years. What the humans did to that system challenged every galactic law about warfare and the treatment of enemies. The Devourers had dozens of worlds in their home system. Each planet pulsed with organic life that had been shaped into cities, factories, and breeding grounds. From space, the worlds looked like massive organs in some cosmic creature, connected by streams of bioships that carried resources between them. The humans did not attack these worlds directly. Instead, they began a process they called systematic sterilization. General Young-Soo commanded the ground forces from his command ship. As Quan Ho watched, human troops landed on each Devourer world not to conquer them, but to fundamentally change them. They deployed weapons that Quan Ho had never seen before, devices that could rewrite the genetic structure of entire ecosystems. "Evolution. Bombs armed and ready," reported one of the human commanders. "Target. Devourer Homeworld Primary Population Center." "Deploy the evolution bombs," General Young-Soo ordered calmly. The weapons that fell on the Devourer worlds did not explode in the traditional sense. Instead, they released clouds of engineered viruses that spread across continents in a matter of hours. But these viruses did not kill the Devourers. They changed them. Quan Ho watched in amazement as the virus clouds settled over Devourer cities. Within days, the creatures began to change. Their feeding organs shrank and disappeared. Their aggressive instincts faded. Their ability to digest other species vanished completely. "Evolution bomb deployment successful," reported Dr. Hae Young, the lead scientist for the project. "Devourer aggression genes have been suppressed. Feeding mechanisms have been neutralized. They retain full intelligence and emotional capacity, but they are no longer capable of harming other species." When some members of the Galactic Council observation team protested this genetic manipulation, General Young-Soo's response was swift and final. "We are not committing genocide," he explained during a communication with the Council ship. "Every Devourer will survive this process. They will retain their culture, their intelligence, and their way of life. The only thing we are removing is their ability to consume other species. But you are fundamentally altering their nature without their consent," protested Ambassador Zormel. General Young-Soo was quiet for a moment before responding. "Would you prefer that we kill them all? Because those are the only two options that ensure they never threaten anyone again." The transformation of the Devourer worlds took 6 months. Quan Ho watched as entire planets changed from nightmarish feeding grounds into something resembling normal civilizations. The Devourers built new cities designed for their transformed bodies. They developed agriculture to replace their previous diet of other species. They even began creating art and music. But the most disturbing part of the operation was not what the humans did to their enemies. It was what they did for them. As soon as the genetic transformation was complete, human medical teams landed on every Devourer world. They brought food, medicine, and technology to help the transformed creatures adapt to their new biology. They established schools to teach young Devourers how to live without consuming other species. They even sent human volunteers to serve as teachers and guides. Lieutenant Commander Bo Ram led one of these humanitarian missions to the former Devourer homeworld. Quan Ho watched as she worked alongside creatures that had once been humanity's greatest enemy, helping them build farms and factories suited to their new way of life. "Why are you helping them?" Quan Ho asked during one of their conversations. "A year ago, these same creatures were trying to consume your entire species." Boram looked up from where she was teaching a group of young devourers how to cultivate edible plants. "Because the war is over," she said simply. "They are no longer our enemies. They are just another species trying to survive in a difficult galaxy. But after everything they did to you—" "What they did to us was in their nature," Boram interrupted. "They were predators who saw other species as food. We changed their nature, so now they are something else. Holding grudges against them. For what they used to be would be like hating a tiger for having been born with claws." The rehabilitation process took 3 years to complete. When it was finished, the former devourers had been fully integrated into galactic civilization. They became peaceful traders and scholars, contributing their knowledge of biotechnology to the greater good of all species. But perhaps the most remarkable part of Operation Final Harvest was what happened during the final negotiations. Instead of demanding tribute or territory as the price of victory, humanity offered the former devourers something unprecedented: protection. The treaty that ended the human-devourer war established the transformed creatures as a protectorate of human space. Any species that threatened them would face the full military might of humanity. The former devourers, who had once been the galaxy's greatest predators, were now under the protection of the species that had defeated them. "Why?" asked Quan Ho during his final interview with Admiral Seung Ho. "Why protect the species that tried to destroy you?" The Admiral looked out the window of his command center at the transformed devourer worlds below. Peaceful cities sparkled in the light of their sun, no longer the feeding grounds of galactic nightmares. "Because someone has to," he replied. "We changed them. We took away their ability to defend themselves through aggression. That makes them our responsibility now. But your people suffered so much because of them. Surely you feel some desire for revenge?" Admiral Seung Ho turned to face Quan Ho directly. For the first time in months, the human's expression showed something other than cold military efficiency. There was sadness in his eyes, and something that might have been regret. "Revenge is a luxury we cannot afford," he said quietly. "Our goal was never to punish the devourers for what they were. Our goal was to ensure they could never threaten anyone again. We accomplished that goal. Everything else is just unnecessary cruelty." As the human fleet prepared to return to human space, Quan Ho found himself struggling to understand what he had witnessed. Humanity had faced extinction and responded by becoming something that could rewrite the fundamental nature of their enemies. They had turned the galaxy's most dangerous predators into peaceful citizens. But they had done this not through hatred or revenge, but through a cold, clinical understanding of what victory actually required. They had changed the devourers not to punish them but to save everyone else. It was the most terrifying and hopeful thing Quan Ho had ever seen. Humanity had proven that any enemy could be defeated, any threat could be neutralized, any problem could be solved, if one were willing to pay the price in time, resources, and moral complexity. As the observation fleet jumped to faster-than-light travel, leaving the transformed devourer worlds behind, Quan Ho began to understand that he had witnessed something that would change the galaxy forever. Humanity had not just won a war. They had demonstrated a new way of thinking about conflict and resolution. The question that haunted him as they traveled back to Council space was simple. What would humanity do when they encountered the next impossible problem? 5 years had passed since the end of the human-devourer war. Quan Ho finished his report by looking out at the stars, knowing that somewhere among them, humans stood guard against threats the galaxy could not imagine. But he was no longer afraid of monsters in the dark. He was no longer even afraid of what humanity had become during the war. What filled him with awe was the realization that humanity had chosen to become something greater than monsters or heroes. They had become gardeners of galactic civilization, tending to peace with the same ruthless efficiency they had once applied to war. His final words in the report were simple but profound. "I witnessed humanity at war, and it changed me forever. Not because of their capacity for violence, but because of their capacity for growth. They showed us that any species can evolve beyond their limitations if they are willing to pay the price. The humans taught us that true strength lies not in the ability to destroy your enemies, but in the wisdom to transform them into allies. They proved that the greatest victory is not conquest, but the creation of a future where conquest is no longer necessary. We feared that humanity's transformation during the war would make them into monsters. Instead, their transformation made them into something far more dangerous and far more wonderful. They became hope incarnate. As Quan Ho submitted his final report to the Galactic Council, he reflected on how much he had changed during his years of observation. He had begun as a peaceful scientist, studying what he expected to be humanity's extinction. He had ended as someone who understood that sometimes the greatest act of love is the willingness to become something terrible in order to protect what matters most. The Villani had always believed that violence solved nothing. The humans had taught him that violence, properly applied, could solve everything, but only if those who wielded it were wise enough to put it aside when the work was done. In the end, that was humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy, not their weapons, not their tactics, not even their victories. Their gift was the proof that any species could choose to become better than their nature demanded, if they were willing to sacrifice everything for that choice. The stars continued to shine in the darkness, and somewhere among them, former enemies worked together to build a future none of them could have imagined alone. It was not the future anyone had planned, but it was a future worth the terrible price that had been paid to create it. Quan Ho closed his datapad and walked home through the peaceful streets of his world, carrying with him the knowledge that peace was not the absence of monsters. It was the presence of those willing to become monsters so that others would not have to. And in that knowledge, he found not fear, but gratitude for the humans who had chosen to bear that burden for all of them. Quan Ho had returned to his homeworld, but he could never be the same peaceful scientist he once was. The galaxy itself had changed, quietly restructuring around the new reality that humanity had created through their victory. Every species now studied human tactical innovations. Military academies across the galaxy taught courses on human warfare theory. Diplomatic schools analyzed human negotiation strategies. Even peaceful civilizations like Quan Ho's own people had begun asking uncomfortable questions about what they would do if faced with their own extinction-level threat. Quan Ho sat in his research laboratory, surrounded by 5 years of notes, recordings, and analysis. His final report on humanity lay before him, nearly complete but lacking a conclusion. How could he summarize what he had learned about a species that had redefined the very concepts of war and peace? The communication panel in his lab chimed with an incoming message. Admiral Ji Woo, now Director of Galactic Security for the United Species Council, was requesting a meeting. She was visiting his homeworld as part of a diplomatic tour, and she wanted to speak with him personally. They met in a quiet garden on the grounds of the Villani Science Institute. Admiral Ji Woo looked much the same as she had during their first meeting 5 years ago, but Quan Ho could see the weight she carried. Her eyes held memories of every decision made, every sacrifice ordered, every victory purchased with blood. "It's good to see you again, Quan Ho," she said as they sat on a bench overlooking a pond filled with native Villani water plants. "I've read your preliminary reports. Your observations were invaluable during the war." "I have been struggling to complete my final analysis," Quan Ho admitted. "I find it difficult to put into words what I witnessed." Admiral Ji Woo nodded understandingly. "War changes everyone who experiences it, even observers like yourself." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the peaceful plants sway in the gentle current. Finally, Quan Ho asked the question that had been haunting him for years. "Admiral, do you ever regret what humanity became during the war?" Ji Woo considered the question carefully before answering. "We became what we needed to become to protect not just our own species, but every species in the galaxy. The devourers would have consumed everything eventually. Someone had to stop them. But at what cost? I interviewed your soldiers, your scientists, your children. They gave up so much of their humanity to achieve victory." "Yes," Ji Woo agreed simply. "They did." "Was it worth it?" Admiral Ji Woo gestured toward the garden around them. "Look around, you, Quan Ho. Your people still exist. Your world is still beautiful and peaceful. Your children will grow up in a galaxy where the devourers are farmers and artists instead of predators. Was preserving this worth the price we paid? Quan Ho had no answer to that question. Instead, he asked another. What happens now? What does humanity do with all the power you gained during the war? We try to be worthy of it, Jiwoo replied. We help other species solve problems they cannot solve themselves. We protect civilizations that cannot protect themselves. We try to ensure that no one else has to make the choices we made. As if to illustrate her point, Jiwoo showed him a datapad containing reports from across the galaxy. Human peacekeeping forces were helping to resolve conflicts on 17 different worlds. Human scientists were sharing medical technology that saved millions of lives each year. Human engineers were terraforming dead worlds to provide homes for displaced populations. Most remarkably, former enemies were now among humanity's closest allies. The reformed Devourers served alongside human forces as peacekeepers and scientists. Their biotechnology, combined with human engineering, had produced medical advances that benefited every species in the galaxy. Dr. So-young now works with former Devourer scientists, Jiwoo explained. Together, they have developed treatments for diseases that have plagued the galaxy for centuries. War criminals have become peace builders. Weapons of destruction have become tools of creation. And the humans who were changed by the war, people like Colonel Tae-hyun and Dr. Yoonji? Admiral Jiwoo's expression grew sad. They carry scars that may never fully heal. Many of our veterans struggle with what they had to become during the war. We have therapists and support programs, but some wounds go too deep for easy healing. She paused, looking out across the peaceful garden. But they continue to serve. They use the skills they learned during the war to protect others. Colonel Tae-hyun now trains peacekeeping forces. He teaches them how to make hard decisions without losing their humanity completely. Dr. Yoonji develops medical treatments instead of weapons. She saves lives instead of taking them. And Major Subin, the child soldier, she leads a program for war orphans across the galaxy. She helps children who have lost everything find new purposes in life. She ensures that they do not have to become soldiers like she did. As their conversation continued, Quan Ho began to understand something important. Humanity had not simply won the war against the Devourers and returned to their previous existence. They had been fundamentally changed by the experience, and they were using that change to reshape the galaxy into something better. Admiral, Quan Ho said finally, I have one last question. Are you still human? Jiwoo smiled for the first time during their conversation. It was a sad smile, but a genuine one. That is something we ask ourselves every day. We became something new during the war, something the galaxy had never seen before. The question is not whether we are still the humans we used to be. The question is whether we can become the humans the galaxy needs us to be. She stood to leave, but paused before walking away. We broke ourselves to save the galaxy, Quan Ho. Now we have to figure out how to fix what is left. It may take generations, but we are committed to the task. After Admiral Jiwoo departed, Quan Ho returned to his laboratory and began writing. His conclusion. The words came easily now, flowing from his understanding of what humanity had accomplished and what it meant for the future. His final report would change galactic politics forever. In it, he wrote, humanity's greatest weapon was never their technology or tactics. It was their willingness to sacrifice their own nature for a greater cause. They did not just defeat the Devourers, they transformed themselves into something the galaxy had never seen before. The humans proved that any threat can be overcome if a species is willing to pay the necessary price. They showed that evolution is not just a biological process. It can be a conscious choice made in the face of impossible challenges. But perhaps most importantly, they demonstrated that Victo